Trump says very dangerous for UK to do business with China as Starmer lands in Shanghai. Donald Trump said it was very dangerous for the UK to do business with China as Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer arrived in Shanghai on the third day of his visit to the country. The US president was reacting to agreements aimed at increasing business and investment between the UK and China, announced after Sir Keir met Chinese President Xi Jinping. Speaking at the premiere of a documentary about his wife Melania on Thursday, Trump went on to refer to Xi as a friend of his and said he knew the Chinese president very well. In response to Trump's remarks, Downing Street indicated that Washington had been aware of this trip and its objectives in advance. Number 10 also pointed out the U.S. president was due in China himself in April. The U.S. president was asked by a reporter, "What do you think about the UK going into business with China?" Beyond his brief comments, Trump did not say anything further about the UK's engagement with China, pivoting instead to Canada and delivering a similar warning. He said it was even more dangerous, I think, for Canada. Canada is not doing well. They're doing very poorly, and you can't look at China as the answer, he added. Earlier this week, the U.S. president threatened to impose tariffs on Canada if it went through with economic deals struck with China on a recent visit to Beijing by its Prime Minister, Mark Carney. The comments come after Sir Keir said the UK's relationship with China was in a good, strong place, following his talks with Xi at the Great Hall of the People on Thursday. Sir Keir said on Friday that the very good meetings with Xi had provided just the level of engagement that we hoped for. We warmly engaged and made some real progress, actually, because the UK has got a huge amount to offer, he told a meeting of the UK-China Business Forum at the Bank of China in Beijing. So far, several things have come out of Sir Keir's trip, including an agreement on visa-free travel and lower whisky tariffs, as well as a £10.9 billion investment by AstraZeneca to build manufacturing facilities in China. Agreements on further cooperation in other areas such as organized crime and illegal immigration were also announced. The U.S. was the UK's largest single-country trading partner in 2025, while China was the fourth largest, according to the Department for Business and Trade. The chair of the British Chamber of Commerce in China, Chris Torrens, praised Sir Keir's visit to Beijing as successful. Torrens told the BBC it made sense for the UK to be looking to China. It's one of its larger trading partners. He added that other Western leaders had either been to Beijing recently or would do so soon, including Trump, who is expected to visit in April. The U.S. are maybe sanctioning and reprimanding other economies and slapping tariffs on countries that are doing deals with China, but the U.S. itself may well do a deal with China. In fact, we expect that this year, Torrens told the BBC. Sir Keir arrived in Shanghai on Friday morning, his last stop in China before leaving for Tokyo to meet his Japanese counterpart, Sanae Takaichi, for a working dinner. Opposition MPs have criticized the Prime Minister over his trip to China, the first by a UK leader since 2018, over the risk posed to the UK's national security and Xi's human rights record. China has been accused of serious human rights violations by the UN against the Uyghur population and other mostly Muslim ethnic groups. It has also been criticized over the treatment of Hong Kong pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai, who is facing life in prison. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp said Sir Keir had gone to Beijing to kowtow to President Xi and accused the government of trading national security for economic crumbs off the Chinese table. Earlier this month, the government received similar criticism when it approved China's plans for a huge new embassy in central London. Security Minister Dan Jarvis said intelligence agencies had been integral to that decision-making process, and he was content any risks are being appropriately managed. When Sir Keir Starmer's plane touched down in Shanghai, the city greeted him with its usual confidence, steel towers clawing at the clouds, neon reflections trembling on the Huangpu River, and the quiet certainty of a nation that knows it matters. For Britain, this visit was more than ceremonial. It was a recalibration. For Donald Trump, watching from across the Pacific, it was very dangerous. The word landed with weight. Dangerous. Not controversial, not complicated, but dangerous. Spoken by a man who has never been shy about turning geopolitics into spectacle. Standing at a film premiere celebrating his wife Melania, Trump offered a warning wrapped in familiarity. President Xi, he said, was a friend. someone he knew very well. Yet friendship, in Trump's world, does not cancel suspicion. If anything, it sharpens it. Britain, in his view, was wandering too close to the dragon. Downing Street was quick to project calm. Washington, they said, knew about the trip, knew its aims. And besides, Trump himself was expected in China by April. The subtext was clear. This is not betrayal. This is diplomacy. The sort that happens quietly in grand halls and loudly in headlines. Inside the Great Hall of the People, Sir Keir spoke of warmth and progress, of engagement that felt good and strong. He talked of what Britain could offer: innovation, finance, expertise, and what China was prepared to give in return: eased visas, lowered whisky tariffs, billions in investment. AstraZeneca's £10.9 billion commitment stood like a monument to pragmatic cooperation, concrete proof that global business rarely waits for moral clarity. Trade numbers hovered in the background like referees. The U.S. remained Britain's largest trading partner. China, the fourth. Neither could be ignored. Neither could be fully trusted. This was the uncomfortable arithmetic of modern leadership. Trump's warning did not stop with the UK. Canada, he said, was in even more danger. Tariffs were threatened, reprimands implied. And yet, the irony was difficult to miss. While cautioning allies against China, the United States itself appeared ready to strike its own deal. Principles, it seemed, were flexible when power was involved. Business leaders, less burdened by ideology, were blunter. Chris Torrens of the British Chamber of Commerce in China called the visit a success. Of course it made sense to look east, he argued. China was already one of the UK's biggest partners, and Western leaders continued to queue for meetings in Beijing. In a fractured world, disengagement was a luxury few economies could afford. Still, the critics were loud. Louder, perhaps, because this was the first UK prime ministerial visit since 2018. Opposition MPs accused Sir Keir of bowing too low, of trading security for economic crumbs. They spoke of the Uyghurs of Hong Kong, of Jimmy Lai waiting in a cell while diplomats shook hands. To them, no tariff reduction could outweigh a compromised conscience. The government's defense was procedural and precise. Intelligence agencies were consulted, risks assessed, managed, contained. It was the language of modern statecraft, less heroic than history books suggest, more spreadsheet than speech.